Welcome to Connecting Dots, a laser-focused quick-fire interview on food and policy with international experts, where we seek answers to questions all of us should be asking. I'm Ajay Jakhar, Chairman Bharat Krishik Samaj of Farmers Forum India, as well as the Vice Chair of Action Track 2, Shift to Sustainable Consumption Patterns at the UN Food System Summit. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. David Nabarro, the Special Envoy of World Health Organization Director General on COVID-19, and who wears so many hats that there are too many for them, too many for me to count. More importantly, a friend, a mentor, and a colleague. Thank you, David, for taking time out to join us today.
Thank you. Very lovely to be with you, Ajay.
Thank you. You are on a very stressful job. Before we dive into the interview, do you get to manage a full night's sleep? Are you keeping good health?
Absolutely. Actually, I'm sleeping very well, and I'm looking after myself very carefully. And the reason is that it's under these sorts of circumstances of very intense work that you can cut corners on sleep or cut corners on eating. And I've been trying to look after both parts, as I think this current intensity of work is likely to continue for quite a lot more months.
So how bad is it, the COVID pandemic, considering the quality of leadership that rules the world worldwide? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel soon enough?
Well, there's a few things in that question which I'll just unpick quickly. First of all, this pandemic started at the very end of 2019. So we're now, if you add it up, about 16 months into it. And over the last few months, we've seen a upsurge in the numbers of people reported as having COVID, and also an upsurge in the numbers of people who have died with COVID. And so the only conclusion I can reach is that the pandemic is still fierce. Now, my colleagues in the World Health Organization have expressed frustration recently that the pandemic is so strong globally because we do have a fairly clear idea of what needs to be done to stop the virus from spreading in any community. And that is to act rapidly and robustly to contain spikes as soon as they're discovered. But if the spikes turn into surges and you get an explosive outbreak, as you're seeing at the moment in parts of India, then that actually leads to the virus being much more widespread, and the likelihood is that the disease will stick around for longer. So in conclusion, we are still very much inside the tunnel. There is light at the end of the tunnel in that we know that societies will be able to come through this, but it's a long tunnel. And that's the tough part. I can't tell you how long it's going to be.
So the world is in the midst of a calamity, and President Biden has proposed waiving intellectual property rights for COVID vaccine technology. Many European countries are opposed to the idea. What is the view of the World Health Organization on this? Will it help speed up production and vaccination?
The World Health Organization is really keen that all world leaders consider every possible way in which the different solutions and responses to the COVID crisis can be made available more widely. And obviously that includes trying to improve access to vaccine. And one prospect for improving access to vaccine is to increase the number of places where vaccine could be manufactured, or if not manufactured, where the actual packaging of the vials of vaccine can be undertaken. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the World Health Organization is concerned, the situation is so serious that every possible option must be considered, and must be considered seriously, even options that perhaps at first sight don't appear to be something that everybody would like. So improving the accessibility of manufactured vaccines, ensuring that they're manufactured using good manufacturing practice, and increasing the distribution throughout the world are all things that matter. And certainly the proposal to change the way in which the vaccine manufacturer is licensed through some form of actual compulsory distribution of the license is perfectly something to be considered. And the WHO position is please do look hard at it along with all the other options being considered.
Thank you. So can you explain the outbreak curve and its implications on what this data shows on the future of the pandemic? You've talked about it at other events, so it'd be nice if you explain this.
Whenever an infectious disease is being studied, particularly with a view to trying to get the infection under control, one particular piece of information is always vital, and that is the number of new cases of the disease that occur over time. And that graph, which is case numbers on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, is called the outbreak curve. A typical outbreak curve starts up quite rapidly because diseases tend to spread quite quickly initially, and then as efforts are made to control the spread, the ascent of the curve will slow, and then a plateau will be reached, and then the incidence will decline, so the curve will come down. And for example, in the UK, the outbreak curve is very low now with 2,000 cases a day, and people are feeling quite happy about this. But as a person working on these kinds of diseases, I'd like to say that it's well known that the most dangerous time in any outbreak control effort is just when the curve is coming down to zero after it's been high, because that's the time when people perhaps take less precautions because they think it's all over, and the virus suddenly has opportunities to move around again, and the outbreak curve starts to rise again. So I always say, beware the time when you're getting close to zero. That is your most dangerous time.
So the next question is, we are reading in newspapers for last many months in the media that some billionaires have made billions of dollars each in the last 1 year of the pandemic, while millions of people are dying across every street of the world. But these billionaires are not contributing to financing the vaccination of the people across the world. Can there be an international movement to convince them, to shame them, to make them pay for it? Can there be a UN resolution? Can various religions, like at the Vatican in Rome, can they give out this call? What would you personally think about it? It's so frustrating that here are people with billions of dollars, and here are people who are dying.
Yeah. Thank you for pointing out some of the really serious implications of the pandemic for the distribution of income and wealth in societies. The basic fact is that this pandemic tends to hit poor people hardest. And at the same time, the pandemic itself and the containment measures being put in place make poor people a lot poorer, because poorer people have much less buffer to cope with the economic impact of the pandemic than wealthier people. All in all, what the pandemic is doing is widening the gaps between those with wealth and those who are poor. And of course, there are extremes here. Some small numbers of people with a very great deal of wealth have apparently prospered quite a lot in recent months. And of course, hundreds of millions of poor people have definitely got poorer. We see higher levels of hunger and higher levels of malnutrition. Now, this issue is certainly very much in the mind of people who are concerned about inequity. And a number of world leaders, both past and present, have been extremely clear on this. And the major institutions like the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank are also extremely conscious of it. But it's one thing to identify a problem. It's quite another thing to implement a solution to that problem. And in the instance you describe here, it was a differential taxation scheme applied internationally. That depends very much on whether the leaders of individual nations are prepared as a group to identify this as an issue. And of course, It's some nations being wealthier and more powerful than others. It's necessary for the leaders of those wealthy and powerful nations in particular to focus on it. But I do want to say that I think all options are on the table. This pandemic is set to continue for some time, and the need for more equitable finance to deal with its causes and consequences is huge. So I would encourage all citizens who want to see a fairer distribution of resources to tackle the pandemic to speak out in their own communities with their representatives, petitioning their leaders, because it's the leaders of individual nations that have the power in today's world. We don't have a world government, but we govern through the collective efforts of world leaders.
Which comes to the point of world leaders. We are hearing on social media, on the internet, that there are demands coming, there are whiffs and what would you call stirrings or demands coming, that to hold world leaders accountable for the mess that we are in, maybe hold some of them at the International Court of Justice in The Hague. Have you heard any of those rumors or those stirrings in the world?
I've not heard any particular stirrings about accountability of leaders in relation to the pandemic. I have heard reports of inquiries in individual countries. And just yesterday, a review of the World Health Organization's work, actually also alongside a review of how individual countries have acted as well, was published. It's an independent review by a group led by former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Helen Clark, and former President of Liberia, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And what they have done is actually analysed everything that they understand took place through the late 2019 into 2020 and 2021. And they're quite critical. And I was just thinking how good it is that this international panel has delivered a report, that it is, even though commissioned by the member states of the World Health Organization and the WHO itself, it's actually quite critical of just about everybody. And I think that willingness for being held to account is absolutely key at the moment for everybody. Certainly, I believe it applies to me as somebody who has been acting on behalf of the World Health Organization, but I think it applies to anybody in a position of authority, because the pandemic itself has been so unprecedented, so unusual, and so full of uncertainties that obviously decisions had to be made, often extremely rapidly, with incomplete information. And so just simply to learn lessons, inquiries and reviews are necessary. And obviously also there's accountability. But for me, it's the lesson learning and applying the lessons, because we're still in the pandemic, that is the most important part of your question here. Reviews and accountability are key to doing better. And I think all of us need to be participating in these processes.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us today. And safe, keep good health, and hope to see you soon sometime, physically that is. Thank you so much. A pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you
so much. Thank you.